Hey everybody, it's John, the history buff. Again, I want to say thank you very much for the kindness that you guys have really shown me for surgery. Minor thing here, but thank you very much. I'd like to do a reaction to Philomena on, well, Cunk on America, the first part video, and I'll follow up with a second part one. But I thought you guys might like to hear my reaction to what she says about America. It's it's kind of, as we say here, biting the bullet. So I'm a little nervous, but we'll see what she says.
Ask a medieval peasant where America was and you'd get a blank look. Or worse still, the plague.
Colombo thought that if he sailed off the
That's true. You can get the plague.
edge of the map, he'd reappear on the other side like Pac-Man. At first,
Did you see that map? That was pretty cool.
America was and you'd get a blank look. Or worse still, the plague.
Colombo thought that if he sailed
Colombo. Dude, check that out. That's actually, that is a pre-Columbus map. You can see that it is probably along the exploration, around the exploration times. I see they have Africa in there pretty well. Certainly the Mediterranean region. They have Norway in there. They don't have much towards the west, but you can see some of Saudi Arabia and with the Red Sea right there, I think, and the Horn of Africa. So clearly they've been doing some exploring. That's an accurate map for the time when she's talking about.
off the edge of the map, he'd reappear on the other side like Pac-Man. At first, the European colonists found life in the New World hard. Luckily, some Native Americans taught them how to grow corn and where to fish.
Actually, that's very true. A lot of settlers that came over, namely from Europe, when they got to places like Massachusetts, Virginia, the Carolinas, we call it the Eastern Seaboard, the soil was quite different, and the Native Americans were very kind for the most part, and taught the settlers how to grow crops because they were not having a lot of luck. The soil's different than in Europe. And there were things like you would, go fishing and you put like the fish heads or dead fish, in the soil with them, and it would provide the nutrients to grow crops. And they were very kind. In return, not so much from us.
In exchange, the colonists introduced the Native Americans to smallpox.
Sadly, that's true. So smallpox were a big thing. And it's, I guess, I should say, yeah. The settlement was not great. We brought a lot of diseases over. As a matter of fact, it was something like, I want to say 200,000 or 500. No, maybe it was closer to, in the Americas, it was like 200 or 500,000 Native Americans lived there, and a good portion of them, I'd say 90%, died of disease. The rest of them, we used basically biological warfare. I say we because it was both us and, our the country, the head of the colonies, which was Britain for the most part. But even after the American Revolution, Britain was still seen as the better power. The Americans, once they became free, they did that a lot. They did a lot of biological warfare and giving them blankets that had smallpox on it and things like that. It's not good.
Arriving in America to forge a life of honest hard work and toil, many of these colonists quickly discovered they couldn't be arsed. So they stole people from Africa and made them do it instead. What?
It's true. It's true. It was called the triangular trade. It was slaves from Africa to the Caribbean. They picked up Africa to the Caribbean. No, is that Caribbean? It was the rum trade. It was a triangle trade. It was the States to the Caribbean to Africa, and they just kept going around and around, and it was a triangular trade, as they called it. And yes, they did bring in a lot. At first, though, I have to say, slavery wasn't what we knew it as It's bad, don't get me wrong, but it was worse when they invented the cotton gin. So everyone was kind of in on it at first. It didn't become more illegal until, after the American Revolution. It was sort of like, hey, everyone's doing it, until a few people started realizing that this wasn't good. We had indentured servitude where people would come over for like 20 years and work for someone in exchange for land. That was also a thing.
What started the tension between the British and the Americans? Was it because you say cookies and we say biscuits, and you say sidewalk and we say pavement?
We do have a lot of different terms for things. The back of a car is called the trunk. You guys call it the boot. Cookies and biscuits. Just the way things go when you have two cultures that split and go in different directions, and different terms come about.
Because I find in a relationship, it's those little things that start to grate after a while. So when the people in Boston got angry with the British, why did they just hold a prissy tea party instead of having a proper fight like British men would?
Would you volunteer?
Tea party. Okay, the tea party was a more of a symbolic thing for the colonists. Proper fight. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so the French and Indian War, which happened, was it maybe 20 or 30 years? No, 20 or 30 years before the American Revolution. It really came close to bankrupting the monarchy in Britain. Britain. And the war was primarily fought over here in the colonies, in the American colonies. So in reality, if you're looking at it, to be fair, they were trying to tax the American colonists for defending them. And Oversimplified does a great little thing on it, but the bottom line is that the money needed to come from somewhere, and the colonists did not want to pay for the protection that they received. And that was, and the British government had to make it up, and so they were saying, well, we'll tax. There was a stamp tax, taxes on everything, and the Americans got really frustrated because anything you needed had to have an extra tax on it. I mean, now we're taxed out the wazoo, as we say, but the Tea Party was basically, they were in Boston Harbor, and in other places there were tea parties as well, and places that claimed they had tea parties, but they dressed up like Native Americans, hopped aboard a ship that had tea, I believe from India, and completely started dumping it over in the ocean. And they dressed like Native Americans with face paint on so that they couldn't be identified. But that's what they did.
Voluntarily, when you didn't have to go to jail?
It depends what facilities they had, I think.
I missed
Would
that.
you voluntarily, when you didn't have to go to jail?
Weird clip.
It depends what facilities they had, I think.
76, the leaders of the 13 colonies decided that they didn't want to be called British anymore, but Americans.
Yeah.
This straight white supergroup known as the Founding Fathers drafted the most famous breakup text in history, the Declaration of Independence.
That's awesome. The best breakup text in history. That is great. New number. Who dis? Very true. They were white landowners. So white landowners. Many of them were slave owners at the time, and they believed in a lot of things that the ideas of John Locke and the Enlightenment, and they wanted to create a government based on that. Of course, had to go through the revolution first, and get their freedom, so to speak. But also to note, if you're from the UK or you're from Europe, take note that the first time after we won, or at least after we settled, right? Because it was costly for both sides. After we settled, the first government setup, it didn't work. right? It was called the Articles of Confederation. It didn't work. It was more of a state-run, country. We were called a country, but it was just a bunch of states that were kind of aligned with each other. No central tax, so there was no way to pay off all the bills after the revolution. And some states were getting ready to go to war with other states, and it was really weird. So the founding fathers realized, but we need to rethink this.
Had invented camouflage yet. The British troops of the time wore bright red coats and were consequently shot in their thousands while looking amazing. George Washington.
That's great. They did look amazing. And actually it was for the time period, you're talking about just little balls of shot that would come out of a musket. And so you stand in line and you hope that you hit the person in front of you. But camouflage really didn't have that much of effect on the battlefield. What was effective during the American Revolution, even though the Americans did not do that well on their own, they were extremely effective at what we know today as guerrilla warfare. So what ended up happening was British troops had to be stationed all along the seaboard, up and down from Georgia all the way up to what is today Maine. It was all part of Massachusetts at that point. And these sort of hit and run tactics, it's like playing whack-a-mole, if you've ever heard of that, where you're hitting the thing that pops up wherever it goes, all over the place. It was very effective, and it helped keep the revolution or the war against colonies, whatever you guys call it there, going. But the red uniforms, though, were very, when you saw lines and lines of what we call them, the redcoats, coming in waves, it was very intimidating, extremely intimidating. And early on, the rebellion, they would just crumble in front of them because it was such an impending, such a force. And with the bright red coats, yes, they did look great. They were professional soldiers, and Britain was the top power at the time. I mean, they were pushing France out of North America. So it really wasn't a great time to fight against the British.
Washington crossing the Delaware River.
As you can see, he had to stand up for the whole journey because he hadn't reserved a seat. He didn't fall in, but he also didn't help with the rowing, which eventually Washington won.
Okay. He didn't help with the rowing. That was good. Those are called Durham boats. It's I grew up in a place where near the place where they make those. But yeah, there's part one. By the way, to everyone, thank you so much. I think you enjoy what we're doing here. I'm getting better at it, I hope, and I appreciate your input. I always do. I love your comments. They're fascinating, especially learning more about English history. So I thought I'd shove this gem in there for you. I hope there's a part 2 coming, and if you keep suggestions of videos, if I get enough people that say the same thing, I know I'm going to do the Blackadder at some point. I've seen like a half an episode of that a long time ago. I'm going to be doing that, but I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you for part 2. Thanks.